Good morning. If you have a Bible with you, you may want to be in Luke chapter 19. That was part of our reading from Monday. Luke 19, 10 Minas. This is a parable. Luke 19 verse 11 gives us confirmation, so I'm very sure in stating that. This is a parable that Jesus tells us that we're probably not as familiar with as we think we are. Because if I describe the parable to you, you probably think of a different parable. What is it? A nobleman needs to go and take a journey, and so he calls some slaves to him, and he provides them the funds to do something while he's gone, to invest them in some business venture or enterprise or whatever it may be, and then he goes off on his journey. While he's gone, the slaves invest and they do what they will with the money. Upon his return, the nobleman calls them to account and calls them to answer his questions. What did they do with it? Well, one of them invested very well. One of them invested kind of pretty well, and one of them didn't invest at all. And the nobleman meters out rewards based on performance. To the one who did so much more has been given to him. To the one who did fairly well, he got a fair portion. And to the one who did absolutely nothing, or even less than nothing, even what he had was taken away. Now, what parable is that? And everybody says, well, that's the parable of the talents from Matthew 25. Isn't it? Where Jesus tells a parable, where God is this nobleman who comes in and he gives to each according to his ability. Matthew 25 and verse 15. And the story is Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30. In verse 15, he gives to one servant 5, and he gives to one servant 2, and he gives to one servant 1, as each one had the ability. And the story of the talents, the parable of the talents from Matthew 25, is really a story about what you can do and the things that you should do with the blessings God has given you. God has blessed you with various capabilities. He's given you various resources at your disposal. Every one of us is a little bit different, and every one of us is told to invest those as we see fit under God's plan. When God returns, He judges us, and then comes that judgment day pronouncement, and we end up either with Him or away from Him. That's what the parable of the talents is about. It's about you and how you respond to God. But that's not what the 10 minas is about. If you read Luke 19, verses 11 through 27, it's not about each getting as he has an ability. God just gives a blanket gift to a bunch of different people and expects them to go and work. It's not really about what you can do in your particular position and where you end up on Judgment Day. It's really about the character of God. It's about the kingdom, if you read verse 11. Jesus tells a parable, spoke another parable because they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. It's about the kingdom, it's about the king, it's about the personality of who God is. Matthew 25 is a story about you. Luke 19 is a story about God. So what we're going to do today is read through this parable of the 10 minas and then observe some things that you see about God and what His kingdom looks like when it arrives. Luke chapter 19, I'll start reading in verse 11, and I'll go down through verse 27. Now as they heard these things, he spoke another parable, because he was near Jerusalem, and because they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. Therefore he said, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. And so he called 10 of his servants, delivered to them 10 minas. A mina is a measure of money, by the way, in case I didn't say that earlier. He measured to them 10 minas, and he said to them, do business until I come. But his citizens hated him. They sent a delegation after him, saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. And so it was that when he returned, having received the kingdom, he then commanded these servants to whom he had given the money to be called to him, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Then came the first, saying, Master, your mina has earned 10 minas. And he said to him, well done, good servant, because you were faithful in a very little, have authority over 10 cities. The second one came, saying, Master, your mina has earned 5 minas. Likewise, he said to him, you also be over 5 cities. And another came, saying, Master, here is your mina, which I have kept put away in a handkerchief. For I feared you, because you are an austere man. You collect what you did not deposit. You reap what you did not sow. And he said to him, Out of your own mouth I will judge you, you wicked servant. You knew that I was an austere man, collecting what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not put my money in the bank, that at my coming I might have collected it with interest? He said to those who stood by, Take the mina from him, give it to him who has the 10 minas. They said to him, Master, he has 10 minas. For I say to you, that to everyone who has more will be given, and from him who does not have even what he has will be taken away from him. But bring here those enemies of mine, who do not want me to reign over them, and slay them before me. Well, that's kind of an abrupt ending, isn't it? It's kind of a weird verse to tack on to the end there. And actually, as you read through this story is kind of a little bit weird. The nobleman goes away. Why? To receive a kingdom. Most of the time when God talks about, or when Jesus tells a parable about someone going away, he just says the person went away and then comes back. Here he gives him a purpose for it. Now he's the king. And the nobleman, as the king, has the authority to call his slaves before him. Well, the nobleman already had the authority to call his slaves before him. So why is that detail included in here? It's kind of a weird story. What about this delegation that's sent after him in verse 14? Why do we need to know? The citizens hated this guy, and they sent a delegation after him. It seems like they didn't do anything, because verse 15 just says that when he returned, he had received the kingdom. So they tried to get him out, and it didn't work. And then at the end, he just kind of comes around and kills all the citizens who didn't like him. And you start to ask the questions, why is that in there? This is a parable, but then it has some weird points built inside of it. But that's why we need to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the story, because from what I've read, Jesus isn't just making up this parable. He's actually referencing a historical event. I can introduce you to a man named Archelaus. He goes by the title Herod Archelaus. There are many Herods in the New Testament. Herod is just a title. It means king. It's not actually a name itself. You have Herod the Great. You have Herod Agrippa. You have Herod Agrippa the second one. You have Herod the Tetrarch. You have Herod Philip. You have Herod Archelaus. He's just another one in the long line. Herod Archelaus is a curious man. He's the son of Herod the Great being the one in Matthew 2 who commanded the execution of Jesus, that they hunt down the infants and try to take care of the king of Israel before he even came about. After Herod the Great died, there was a little bit of a question of who would succeed to his throne, because if you remember, Israel is under the rule of the Roman Empire, and the Romans had a rule. If the king of the land died, you were able to come into Rome and make a case for why you should be the king, but you can't just claim kingship by yourself. The Romans didn't want any upstarts or any uprisings just spouting out of the ground, and so they said, if you have a claim to the throne, come and make the case to Caesar, and if you pass the test, then you can be the king. Herod Archelaus was just a nobleman, but when his father died, he had to go to a far-off land to receive a kingdom. And then, as he was on his way, the Jews realized they didn't like him very much. It's understandable. Herods come from the Edomite line, which is from the people of Esau, and Israelites come from Israel. There is a family rivalry in there, built in the womb between Jacob and Esau, and ultimately exploding out in the New Testament. Herods over Jews, they did not like each other. And Herods in general were terrible, horrible people. We don't want him over us. So what did the Jews do? Well, they formed a delegation and they sent it after him, asking Rome, petitioning Rome, maybe, Caesar, could you make sure this guy doesn't become king over us? We don't want him as the king. He's unpopular. And maybe they thought that they could get away with that and try to dissuade Herod from claiming his rightful throne. Unfortunately, Herod Archelaus turned right around and came back home as the king. And then what do you think happened to all of those Jews who opposed his rule and said they didn't like him and they didn't want to listen to him and they didn't want to obey him? When he comes back as king, there are some consequences that are metered out on people. And the reason that's important to understand is, as much as ancient Roman history is of no consequence to much of the stories that are told, when we consider that setting, kind of paints a little bit of a picture, doesn't it? The Jews are treating Herod Archelaus as someone that they don't want to obey, someone that they don't want to listen to, someone who rightfully has the authority. He's been declared king of the land, and yet they say, we don't like him, we don't want to adhere to his law, we want to make our own instead. And then you realize when Jesus tells a parable, he's not really talking about Herod. Who's the nobleman who goes away to receive a kingdom? It's Jesus. But what did the people do to Jesus? Did they accept him as a king and follow after him and obey him and listen to him? No. They sent a delegation to God and said, hey, we don't want this Messiah. We want some other Messiah. We don't care about him. And within a week of this story being told, they would execute him on a cross. And suddenly that puts a little bit of a different spin on the story. The evil king that you might oppose on the physical realm, when you treat God the same way, there are consequences for that. There was a reason they opposed Herod coming to the throne, but then they also opposed God coming to the throne. How do you think God feels about that? When the Jews treat God as the same way as they treat the evil king, is it any wonder that God would deal harshly with them? Is there any wonder that their covenant was taken away and replaced with something else? We talked about the old law in Bible class and how it has been changed out for the new law because there was disobedience. And God removed it from them and installed himself as the king. It doesn't matter whether they want him king or not. It doesn't matter what they try to do to oppose him. God comes in as the king, and what Jesus is saying is, I'm coming as king, even though you don't like it. This is a story that's told just a couple days, or maybe even the day before the triumphal entry, marking 5 days until Jesus would be put on trial and falsely accused and executed. But his message is very clear. I've gone to receive a kingdom, and I'm going to receive a kingdom, whether you like it or not. There's a subtext there. As he's telling it to these people, he's telling them a story. They will claim they have no king but Caesar when they go and execute him. But that's just what these people in verse 14 tried to say, and it didn't work for them. So it won't work against Jesus either. There's an inspiration there. It's curious. All the names may get to you and confuse you from a historical point of view, but there's a point as to why Jesus is telling this story. He's not just making this one up out of nowhere. He's referencing an event that was very impactful, even for his personal childhood. Well, that's the inspiration for the story. Then you start reading the story, and you start to wonder what's going on here. First, notice why the story is being told. Verse 11, as they heard these things, he spoke another parable because he's near Jerusalem and because they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. Jesus is dealing with Israelites who are anticipating the coming of the Messiah. But their idea of the Messiah and their idea of the kingdom is someone who's going to come down and wrest control of Judea away from Rome to make sure that they have a physical land to live in and a physical kingdom to follow and a physical king to look up to. And they think all of this is going to be physical. They're so anticipating the return of the king. They're so anticipating the king establishing himself and the throne of David coming back to rule them in a physical way that they're missing out on the point of who God is. Jesus told this to them because they thought that's how the kingdom of God would appear immediately. It was going to be here. They thought Jesus was entering Jerusalem so that he could set up a throne for himself. They don't understand the real point. They don't understand what God is trying to do. Jesus is clarifying it for them. What happens when the kingdom appears for them? They have this idea a physical kingdom is going to appear. They're going to storm the gates of the Roman Empire and throw out all the Romans from their city. But what is God's kingdom really? Is it an insurrection that throws off the weight of the physical rulers of the land? No, it's not. It's a kingdom within those kingdoms. It's a kingdom greater than those kingdoms. A kingdom not based on geography, but based on the rule of God. And when God's rule comes in, the Jews are suddenly not going to like that anymore. How many people are following Jesus? How many people believe in him? How many people are faithful to him? When you look at the Jewish crowds around him, how many believers is he going to have in just a week from this day? It's 11. Because one of his followers, one of his 12, decided to off himself. And you're rejoicing the kingdom coming? You're saying you take pride in the return of the king, but you're actually against the king. You say you want God to come down, but you're actively going to kill God. You say you want to obey him, but then you do everything to fight against him. Have you really considered what it means, people, for the kingdom to actually arrive? They didn't. And so here's the story. God, just like Herod, went away to a far-off land to attain a kingdom and then to bring it back. God, just like Herod, has given his servants responsibilities, and God, just like Herod, is going to hold them to account. You better make sure you're accounting for this properly. You better make sure that you know what's coming to you when God and his kingdom arrive. It doesn't do you any good to be excited for the kingdom if you hate the kingdom. These people are excited for something that's going to mean their death. It's not a good place to be in. So Jesus tells a story. A nobleman is about to inherit a kingdom. While he's gone, he gives his slaves some work to do. Everyone is supplied the same. Everyone has the ability to work for the nobleman. But it's really a test of who they are and whether they'll work for him when he's absent or not. The citizens of the country don't like him. And the king already knows the regular citizens don't like him. The king assigns his slaves to work for him, but will that attitude, that hateful attitude from the citizens, will that creep up into his slaves? Well, it's up to him. It's a question. And upon his return, he gets to find the answer. He's now the king, in verse 15. He summons his slaves that he assigned. The citizens' attempts did not work. He has attained the kingship, and now he's calling them to account. Slaves, answer. What did you do with the resources I gave you? What did you do with the blessings I provided you? Well, you get 3 different returns. The first slave made a return of 10 to 1. Well, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty amazing. And so rewarded is that slave. He receives authority over 10 cities of his own within the new kingdom. A second slave comes up. He's made the return of 5 to 1. That's fairly impressive. Not as great as the other guy did, but pretty wonderful in its own right. And so he gets to reward 5 cities of his own. He showed that he was responsible, and so the nobleman gave him responsibility. But this third slave comes up. And the third slave is the problem, because this slave made a return of nothing, and even one might say less than nothing. The third slave, he took his coin from the nobleman, and he proceeded to do absolutely nothing with it. The citizen's attitude has infected him. He should have been a servant of the nobleman, but he wasn't. And he answered to the citizens instead. You can see this third slave's attitude down in verse 20 and 21. Master, here is your mina. Here's your coin. I put it away in a handkerchief. I didn't do anything with it. Why not? Because it's verse 21. I feared you. You're an austere man. You take what you didn't deposit. You reap what you don't sow. I feared you. I don't like you. I don't like how you work. I didn't like your law that you made. I didn't like the assignment that you gave me, so I just didn't do it. And like any good teacher, that nobleman naturally says, then you don't get credit, do you? If you didn't do the work I told you to, what do you gain out of this? I gave you a command. Why are you listening to other forces instead of me? If you knew that I acted in such a horrible way, why did you not even put my money in the bank? It's not just that the servant didn't give the nobleman anything. He kept it out, so inflation kept going up, and the nobleman's money didn't rise with it. If you had put it in the bank, I could have had interest, verse 23, but no, not even that. The slave has gone out of his way to disrespect the noblemen. And so the nobleman, now king, naturally has no need for that kind of slave. His coin is removed. It's given to the one who is responsible. To the one who has, he's proved himself. Let's give him all the more. But to the one who hasn't done anything for me, even what he does have is taken away. Give it to the first one. Get rid of the third. And by the way, get rid of everyone at the same time. The third slave believed rebellion would work. The enemies believed rebellion would work. The ones who sent the delegation saying, we don't want this king to reign, in verse 14, they believed that rebellion would work, but they should have known they couldn't stop the king. And when the king returns, he gives his servants personal attention, but he just says, as for everyone else who rejected me, they suffer for it. There are consequences. When you come in and ignore the things of the king, there are consequences when you do not obey. And so you get to the end of the story. And where are we at? Evaluate that really quickly. The king is absolutely unbothered because he's the king, he's the authority, he can tell you what to do. The servants, the faithful servants, are rewarded, and they rule over cities. They actually become little kings of their own, in their own right. But the unfaithful servant and everyone else who hated the king, well, they also get what they asked for. They don't want to be around him, so they're not. Of course, it's only going to happen by their execution. They may find out they didn't really want to be executed like they asked for. But what happens when you reject the work of the king is that he has no place for you. And so you get no place with him. Again, it's a familiar story. You've seen all these trappings and these elements before. But when you think about the story and you start trying to apply it, it's very simple. Here are a few things that maybe will make sense of who God is and how he acts. The nobleman in the story, the nobleman who goes to receive the kingdom and he comes back the king, is very clearly God. Or maybe you say it's Jesus. Since Jesus is God, I'm going to shorten it and say it's just God. It's the whole thing. God is the nobleman. The slaves are presumably the Christians, the faithful ones who are his people, and the citizens would be everyone else under the rule of God. That would be the entire world. The slaves have a certain relationship with him. The Christians have a special relationship with him, but God is over all. The whole citizenship of the world is the citizens in this story. They didn't want God over them. They rejected him. They stayed away from him. And so God will make sure they stay away from him. That's the end judgment. What do you learn about this king? The first thing you learn is the king is unbothered by his subjects' opinions. The subjects of him, the citizens, verse 14, they hate him, but he's the king anyway. They send something after him to try and get him out of office, but he's the king anyway. You're not going to take that away from him. You cannot take away the authority of God. Some people, when you ask them, if you polled the world, you would have some individuals who believe we have an effect on God. And God is trying to do one thing. He has his plan, and he's got his way of doing stuff. But I can throw a wrench in that, and I can make God's plan stop. And I can get in the way, and I can make it deviate, and I can change what God can do. That's just not true. God is the authority, and we can stop pretending otherwise. Jesus will prove this very definitively when the next week after he tells this story, the Jews go out to kill him. They put him on a cross. They do kill him, and Jesus comes right back and uses that to establish the new covenant. He does his job regardless of how people treat him. It doesn't mean that God's not sorrowful when you disobey him. It doesn't mean that God is not disappointed when we refuse to let him help us, but it does mean we cannot get in the way of God. And anyone who thinks he can stop God's plan is just setting himself up to be taken out by the divine steamroller. It's not a good position to be in, to stand in the way of God. You cannot stop him from being the king. You cannot stop him from being your king. You cannot stop him from having authority over you. You can recognize it or you can ignore it, but at the end of the day, he's the one who passes the law, and you are under him. The king is not bothered by the opinions of those who are under him. He is in charge. and you're not going to make it where it's different than that. But the second thing you could look at, and the second thing to be aware of, is that the king is very aware of his subjects. Some people would look at that first point and say, oh, well, if God's in charge, well, if God's so big, if he's so aloof and above all of this, then he must not know what's happening on the earth. There's a relatively popular theory that some God exists and some God created the world, but then either he died or maybe he just created the world and then stepped away and is just watching it go, and he doesn't really care. But that's not who God is it? God is bigger than the world. But God is also very aware of all the things that are happening in the world. God is bigger than the servants and the citizens. God is bigger than this delegation that goes after him that says, we don't like you very much. God is bigger than that. That doesn't bother him. But he is aware of it. And he takes account of that, at least in the judgment, if not before. Human actions and the way you live, God is aware of those things. And even with what we see from Jesus, it's not just your actions, it's your intentions, it's your thoughts, it's the things that you are thinking internally. God's aware of those things too. God doesn't judge on the outside like man sees. God looks at the heart and judges on that. God is aware of these things. Too many people think God doesn't see, or they think God doesn't care, or they think God isn't present, or they think God is in some way indisposed, but that's not true. Be careful how you act and how you think before God. It's comforting. It's a comforting thought for the faithful that God's aware of all these things. To know that even if I stumble and even if I fail, God knows me. He judges my heart. He knows in many cases I didn't mean to. That's comforting. It's also terrifying if you're on the other side of it. You know that even if you take all the good actions, if your heart isn't in the right place, God knows that and he's accounting for it. It's a call to us to be faithful and to surrender everything over to him because God knows you and he knows you personally. He's aware of these things. And he takes it into account on Judgment Day. Be careful about that. You will not stop God's judgment, and he will judge righteously. He will judge you based on you and everything about you. There's comfort and there's fear. The third thing that you should see about God is very simple. God rewards his subjects for their work. And according to their work, the work of their hands, God rewards people according to what they do. That can be a terrifying thought, can't it? Because the reward is not necessarily good. The reward is just what you get. Sometimes we reference Romans and we say the wages of sin is death. It's not that you sin and then somebody gives you death. No, sin is work, and there's a payment for that. It's wages. It's something that you earn. Be careful with what you earn. God will reward you with what you earn. And if you earn the credit of faithfulness, if you trade with his things well, if you do good work for him, if you put all your effort into pushing forward his things and working for him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over the little bit, now you're faithful over 10 cities. But if you are the one who refuses to do anything for God, you're rewarded for that. You took away what I used to have. You took away the mina, and you wasted that money. Fine, you don't even get that. God will reward you. There are one of two places that you can end up. There are one of two positions you can end up in. It's either on God's good side or it's not. And you get to make a choice in that. For the obedient, they are blessed with further opportunity for obedience. For the disobedience, they are given the opportunity to continue disobeying somewhere else. You take them out and throw them out of the kingdom. They don't belong in here. And someone could always say, they propose the hypothetical situation, well, what if someone never had the opportunity to know God or was never taught about God or just never read the Bible, they didn't know it exists, and they lived in complete isolation and whatnot? You have all those extremities. I don't know. That's not the point, is it? The point is that God comes in and he judges you based on how you worked. If you do what's right, even if you don't know who God is, there may be mercy. If you do what's wrong, even if you don't know God's specific law, there will be punishment. But ultimately, God gets to make that decision. Everyone gets what he asks for at the end of the day. You get to choose how you live. So choose wisely. But I would say this, and I'm not even sure how strongly to make this point. I'm not even sure. This is just an idea. And I'll plant it in your head and see what you do with it. There is a command in this story that regardless of how you feel about God, you should just obey him. I know that we say that God looks at the heart and God judges the heart, and that's true. God says that. But there's also a place to say, you should have just obeyed anyway. When you zoom in on the interaction between this third slave and his master, it is a very curious interaction. And we have just a couple minutes here at the end where we can talk about it. Verse 21, I rejected you. I didn't work for you. Why? Because the slave says, I feared you. You're an austere man. You collect what you didn't deposit. You reap what you didn't sow. I didn't do your work because I didn't like you. I didn't do your work because I didn't appreciate your way of doing things. I didn't do your work. I thought you were a harsh man. I thought you were unpleasant. I thought you were unfair. This slave is voicing all of these concerns about God and who God is and what God's law is. The master doesn't say, actually, I am fair. The master says, even if you think that way, why did you not just obey? Say, I am a harsh man. Out of your mouth I will judge you, you wicked servant. Verse 22. If you knew these things, if you knew that I was an austere man, collecting what I didn't deposit and reaping what I didn't sow, why didn't you do something? For those people who say, God is too harsh for me to obey. Okay, if you believe that God is too harsh, wouldn't you want to try something to make sure he's not harsh towards you? If you believe that God is unfair, wouldn't you try to do your best to make sure he's not unfair towards you? If you believe that God is horrible, wouldn't you do your best to make sure he's not horrible towards you? Even if you believe that I am a horrible master, why don't you just do something? Why don't you just try? There are a lot of people who reject God. They believe in God, but they'll reject God because he's not exactly to their tastes. Jesus is saying that's a really foolish opinion to hold. If you know that God is real, try something. He judges the heart. It may not justify you, but it's better to have tried than it is to just give up. Ultimately, I don't know how God is going to judge every individual case. Some people, many of us, when we go to God first, it's because we're afraid of him. It's because we don't want hell. We don't want the punishment. We don't want all the bad things to happen to us. And we become faithful because that's the way to escape all the punishment. And then after you spend a while with God, you start to realize, actually, he's not as unfair as maybe I thought he was. Or maybe he's not as harsh as I thought he was. Or his mercy is actually pretty great, isn't it? And as you spend time with God and in obedience, you suddenly start to turn a corner and it turns into love. I don't know how God will judge every situation. But I would say, even if you think God is harsh and cruel and unfair, the only intelligent option is to run to him anyway. Because then at least he would be harsh and cruel and unfair to everybody else, but you'd be safe. If you knew that I was so wicked, which I'm not, but let's go with it. If you knew that I was so wicked, why not just try something? And that's a curious thought that most people don't consider. That even if you are in doubt about God, just obey. Obedience is the foundation of the law. What are laws about? They're about finding obedience. They're about making commands so that you are obedient to them. And it all starts with just submitting yourself to him. So obey and be righteous, or at the very least, don't get in God's way. God is looking for people who love him. God is looking for people who are making righteous decisions out of a pure motivation, but we all have to start somewhere. And so even if you are starting from a place of fear, it's better to start there than to ignore God entirely. God is not one-dimensional. He is not all entirely loving and nothing else, and he's not all judgmental and nothing else. God is a balance. And like a good parent, he uses that balance. Everything he does is from the place of love, but you may not understand it until you mature enough to get to the point of seeing how it all comes to fruition. Are you faithful to God? I hope you're faithful because you love him. But even if you don't love him, you'd better be faithful anyway. And I think that's the message of the 10 Minas. We need to be careful. Remember who God is. We are all going to answer to him at the end. Make sure that we are answering wisely. As always, here at the end of the lesson, I'd like to give you an opportunity that if there's anything we can do to help you find your way towards God, to help you reach out to him or reconnect with him if it's been a long time, if there's anything we can help you do to be more faithful, we want to see that happen. So just come down and talk to me. I'll be standing right here as we all stand and we sing this song together.